And from there the interest grew, and we started making notes of the various positions that we found and some of the activities that took place. And when I left Taita and Salt Lake, I had a job down in Mombasa where I was involved in some of the marketing of the hotels, and I had the opportunity to do some research overseas during the various trade shows that we used to go to, ITB, World Travel Market, etc. Spend a little bit of extra time in these places, visiting the museums, meeting contacts, and enlarging the interest of what we were finding. Once we'd started getting a lot of our interests in order, I was looking for artifacts where I would find some empty ammunition cases and things like that, which was proof that a battle took place there. And I would just collect a few pieces as evidence that this particular position that I was in was a site of a gunfight, and I would record it. But I wouldn't clear the battlefield of Infamira. I would just take enough to confirm that that position there was a battle site, and I'd mark it on my map accordingly, and so on. And we went through, I think, nearly 30 battle sites in southeastern Kenya, not only in Taita Taveta, but along the coast as well. Because out here in Kenya, nobody knew about these things. Our local historical society in Mombasa, the Friends of Fort Jesus, encouraged me to start writing. And I'm not a writer by nature. I hate writing, but I had to write it down because I realized that perhaps I was the only one who was doing anything about this. And from there, the interest grew from the Friends of Fort Jesus. We would do outings up here with members there, and we'd go and visit these sites. One of the most interesting sites that I found, which excited me tremendously at the time, was Mwashoti Fort, which is on the northern side of the sanctuary here. And I remember my warden that I had on the sanctuary here, a good fellow by the name of Mwasi, and we'd been out to Taveta to see some of the trenches there, and he said, "You know, Bwana, there's some mandakis like this, trenches, in the sanctuary." And I said, "Where?" And in good bushman's fashion, he said, "Kule," and pointed over yonder. And I said, "Can we go there?" And he said, "Yes, let's go there." And after 2 hours of walking, I got a bit fed up, and he said, "No, it's not very far, it's not very far." In the usual fashion that the bushmen communicate with us. And he said, "But you know, we can actually drive there." And I must have driven past this site 100 times, if not more. It was right beside the road, and it's the most beautifully preserved at that stage earthenware fort built by the Loyal North Lancashire Regiment in 1915. And it became the base camp for the British troops, well, not British troops, but the Allied troops from India and from South Africa prior to their onward journey into German East Africa via Moshi and Taveta. And whilst we were looking over the site there, we would find a lot of remains from the war there, a lot of horseshoes, because of course the South Africans were very keen on cavalry. So there were big horseshoes. These were big animals, and we have a saddle here from the South African forces on display in our little museum here now. Must be one of the few that are still left in the world now. It's unique. In our display cabinets here, we've got 3 display cabinets there, one for camp life, one on the battlefield, and one for general ephemera. And 90% of this stuff has been found within 30 miles of us here, 50 kilometers, most of it. And as the interest grew, people then started communicating with us. We established a website, and it grew like topsy. People started growing interest, and like this weekend now is a culmination of a large number of European representatives of various governmental forces from Europe, most of whom knew nothing about the East African campaign. It's a forgotten campaign of the world, of World War I, and yet it is actually the longest campaign of the First World War, and probably about the most deadliest. 1/4 of the population of Kenya, the Africans, took part in one way or another in the East African campaign here. Many, of course, lost their lives, particularly amongst the porters. Starvation was a major issue. The next issue was lack of water and the lack of food, and the lack of medical care, really. Yeah. Although there were medical facilities in the headquarters. Right. So, you know, the interest widened and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm very proud of what my family, who have supported me tremendously in doing this. My daughter designed all these big boards here and the displays here. And we've had the Australian military here looking after Mr. Dartnell, Lieutenant Dartnell, the only Victoria Cross that was awarded in the Kenya campaign, and so it goes on.
Now, if I may ask, you did your case study, you did your fact finding, all that time you spent on ground here in the wild, trying to trace these locations of the battlefield. What came through your mind that you knew it's a fact that there are black people, if I may say Africans, there are Africans that took part in the battle as porters, some as askaris or soldiers. Yet we are having this community around here that knew that, those that kind of, war that made their loved ones, die. Had some were being brought, the rasta, the hair.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Been told, I'm sorry, your son is no longer there.
Right.
And thank you for his service. Can you just take us through that?
I can do, yes. It's a very delicate subject. The death of anybody, be it a European, an Indian, or an African, is a very poignant subject. And it raises a lot of questions today as well, because particularly in this area here, there is actually nothing to commemorate the African contribution, which was vital here. But then we have to look back 120 years to not the mentality of the African, but how they were. They were survivors in their own environment. Death was not a major issue amongst the population as such. But as I said, death is always a poignant reminder of life, of the value of life. But once the war started, the porters came down here. Most of them were very fit when they arrived here, having come from Western Kenya, a lot of them. And they would have been very fit, and they would have acclimatized in Voi at a place called Kariakor in Voi. Before they would be walking up to Motati and Bura and on to Mactau, which was the main British base in 1915. Now, the King's African Rifles at the start of the war were all doing what the Kenya Rifles are doing today, is keeping the Somalis and the Gala and the Abyssinians out from our borderlands up there. And it's still going on even today, 120 years later. And so it took time for those forces to be withdrawn back into the main battle areas. So the first 18 months of the war, there weren't many KAR Askaris in this area taking part in any fights. So there'd be very few casualties. So there's very little record of those casualties. Casualties really started occurring after mid-1915, where down on the south coast of Kenya, at Jasin, there was a major battle there where the 3 KAR took part in some very severe fighting down there. And then at Latimer and Riata in Taveta, there was some critical fighting going on there. The KAR lost 63 soldiers in a matter of minutes, though, when they walked into a machine gun nest. We don't know who they were.
But in one way or another, you believe that they're connected to these people?
They are probably not connected to the Taita Taveta people, but Kenyans, yeah. The Taita people were used very much because of their association with the CMS, the Church Missionary Society, and the Catholic Mission in Bura, where a lot of the Taitas were taught trade skills, like bricklaying and cementing and roadworks and this sort of thing. The Taitas were valuable people, so the railways used them as artisans, and the road pioneers used them as artisans on the road, making culverts and this sort of thing, rather than being porters. Quite a few of them were porters, and you relate the story of the bit of hair being returned to the parents there, and that's a story that I can't confirm, but it's legend.
It's legend.
It is legend.
Now, just based on that, there is a story that was also based in this. I don't know if it's true or not, but you are the historian here. That they used to look for people who are muscular, and this means that probably they'll have to go to places where, probably in Luya lowland, and fetch these people to come and because they're strong, and this makes it a Kenyan affair, because someone brought all the way from Kisumu or Nyanza or Kikuyuni, Central area, to Taita Taveta, to do the porting, to be a porter, or a soldier. It makes it a Kenyan affair.
It was a very Kenyan affair. And without those porters, the war could not have progressed. Nothing could have happened. Those porters were vital to getting supplies up to Mactau. I think the board at the back there says, 15 tons of supplies could be carried by the porters. But the porters also had to feed themselves.
True.
And so, you needed, between Voi and Mactau, there were 15,000 porters employed on a daily basis.
Okay, go ahead.
bringing supplies in. And it was the most amazing operation. And then again, each unit of porters would have a leader who showed some promise in leadership. He was not necessarily of the same tribe as the majority of the porters that he had, so he would not have been able to communicate with the rest of his company there, and so he wouldn't have known their names, and if they fell by the wayside, it's polisana, and they move on.
We are going to have a short break and we'll be back in a short while.